started working with Compassion for Migrant Children in 2011, early 2011. I'd just come back after doing my master's in London, and I knew I wanted to work in Nepal, and I also knew I wanted to work in kind of the urban area, because I'd seen in the last 5 years or so, like when I was in university, in college, every time I came home I would see another slum settlement. You know, I would see it grow, and there was one very close to my house, so I was always very curious about what was going on there, what were the push-pull factors. The need for especially education and other social services for the children and the families was a lot. So we started off with like a 3-month research process initially, trying to see if we could even get partners on board, if our concepts of community center, bringing a community together, would even work here or not. When the conflict happened, the civil war happened in the country, a lot of people started moving to the city, to Kathmandu, thinking, oh, it's going to be safer, whoever had the option to anyway. And a lot of other families who've moved have moved because of either landslides or other kind of natural disaster, earthquakes, you know, kind of reasons, or the most direct reason is really the conflict. And the fourth reason would be because there's no jobs or education opportunities where they are. So when the families moved here though, during the conflict, even after the conflict was over, a lot of them ended up staying here because their kids were going to much better schools. They were getting the opportunity that they wouldn't get back in their village. In terms of the international migration, there's, employment opportunities. Unemployment is really high here. We have like one of the largest youth bulge populations as well. But then again, a lot of people haven't completed schooling, and there's not as much job creation here. There's not as much of a market, right, either. So everyone, as soon as they're 16, they're looking to go abroad. Before, people used to go to India because it was easy, but now they realize they can't make as much money in India as they could maybe in the Middle East or in Southeast Asia. So then they go as construction workers, plumbers, guards, security people. They immigrate, but a lot of them are treated really badly while they're abroad because they're not necessarily trained before they're leaving. But now that's starting. That's changing slowly. People take advantage of them here. People take advantage of them there. But one of the reasons actually Nepal's economy hasn't really gone down under is because of the money they're sending back. At least 35% of our GDP is remittance. At least, and that's official figures, right? So you can imagine how much is coming in and from other channels as well. Kathmandu has always been the central hub for kind of it's the economic capital, it's the culture capital, it's been the political capital as well. Everything's been quite centralized here. So for anything, people do have to come here. Even those who want to go abroad, they have to come to Kathmandu. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is here, right? So they have to come here. This is kind of the transition. In a way, Kathmandu is both a place of arrival for people who have no option of going further out, but then it's also a transition city for those who are looking to go abroad. And a lot of the youth, especially, they end up living in very, very bad conditions. Maybe it's a legal structure, maybe it's not in the slum, but the situation in terms of like sanitation, there'll be like 20 people sharing one room. They'll split the rent, they're trying to save up until they get a better job. And these are also Nepali children. They're not illegal, they're not refugees, they're citizens. Maybe they don't all have the right documentation right now, but they're Nepali kids. So no matter the fact that where they reside right now is illegal, the child has, basic right to shelter, basic education, and the state should take on that responsibility towards them. If we don't invest in them in the right ways now, that's another generation that kind of is just lost, essentially. And that's what the parents themselves are fighting for as well. Like, they haven't gotten the education. A lot of them can't even read or write, but they want to make sure that their children can. And they do, with whatever money they can save, they send their kids to school. With our community center, one thing we do want to try and promote is that the community should also come together, because they come from like 50 different districts in any one community, which could be anywhere from 200 households to like 600 households. And they come from all over. It's like mini Nepal's on its own. So it takes work to even bring them together initially, right? You need some harmony, some kind of social fabric to be rebuilt within them as well. But then kind of having an international community backing you can have its advantages, because then you're not just bound, or you're not just answerable to this government. You have a wider community that you're accountable to. And sometimes our Nepal government also needs to know that they can't get away with whatever, they're not, that other people are also watching and other people also care. Well, for me personally, not just in working with CMC, I feel like I am where I am today because I had the opportunity to get good education. I had the opportunity to go out, learn, and then come back as well. And I feel like the kids, that even if they're living in very, very difficult circumstances, they should have that opportunity. It could be at a different level, but they should at least have the option of choosing, and the option of getting out of what they see around them. Everybody should have the opportunity to break the cycle. And a lot of families can do it within one generation. You see it with immigrant families going from, say, somewhere from here, even somebody moves to America. Within a generation, you see, because the child has the opportunity of getting good education, because this public education is free, you see within a generation that family can change their, what their life becomes, and not just for themselves, but then also for people back home afterwards. Well, I think there's the basics, right? There's the do no harm principle that you hear in development, which doesn't always work. But yeah, basic kind of respect for another human life on a very kind of macro philosophical level. There's that. But then there's a few kind of non-negotiables that I think we should all have. And I think if we really cared on a global level to make sure it happened, it could happen. Because there's excess in some parts, there's a deficit in other areas. So if both kind of pulled on their parts, and if people who had the opportunities were willing to share their knowledge, or even the interaction, the exchange sometimes, not necessarily saying that somebody who's in the Western world knows a lot more than somebody in less developed parts of the world, but the exchange itself I think is important in terms of recognizing that people have different kinds of lives, people have different kinds of struggles, but at a basic level, if we have access to, say, shelter, to education, to health, then we can at least individually find a way to make decisions for ourselves and not have to depend on anyone else. I think obligation is a bit too heavy of a word, because I don't want to assume that they got to where they did just because it fell onto their laps. They worked hard, I'm sure, for what they've earned, so they should have as much, they should be able to decide what they want to do with it and how they want to help. And helping doesn't necessarily have to mean, send funds over. It doesn't have to mean, we're not just looking at you as donors, we're looking at you as some people that we could learn from. Migration is a global phenomenon that's happening everywhere. And within the next, what are we in, 2012? By 2030 or so, it's going to be, 1 in 3 people, as they say, the UN Habitat says 1 in 3 people will live in slums, if it's 1 in 6 right now. So knowing that, what direction are we going into, right? How do we feel okay as, I'm a city person, I grew up in Kathmandu, how do I feel as a person living here about people coming into my city and the kind of situations that they're being exposed to? I feel like you're talking more about kind of individuals' responsibilities to each other as well. Individuals, no matter what their nationality. But you've seen that even within the same country, people are not willing to take responsibility for another fellow citizen. So is this more kind of about you being in the city and having quick access to a lot of these social services, whatever it is? Or is the divide more rural urban rather than global and national even at this point? Because these challenges you'll see replicated all over the world. Mongolia has it, China has it, of course, Nepal, India, every country. You just said about a worker in, say, China or Bangladesh making something for you, and the end buyer is in the US or maybe in the Middle East or somewhere else. And there's still cases now of how much exploitation that happens for these workers, right? Like, why should, if the company's making, say, like $100, why shouldn't the person who's actually putting in the labor into it get at least like $50, if that? You know, why do they get like 35 cents or something ridiculous like that? And those are the kind of questions that maybe the end user community can bring out. Because of course the in-country governments or even businesses aren't really interested in their welfare, they're looking more at profit. So in that sense, I think what we owe, like, the awareness is definitely important in country, and as if you're an export country, then in the end countries as well. But yeah, who knows how the global powers are going to shift in these next 20 years or so.